Do you really know the people around you? Or have you just convinced yourself that you do? You probably believe you can recognize when someone is toxic, when their energy weighs heavy in a room, or when a line of respect is being crossed. But what if the true danger isn't loud, aggressive, or obvious? What if the most destructive people in your life are not the villains you expect, but the ones who smile the most, the kind ones, the charming ones, even your closest family members? While you're guarding against the enemies you can see, your mind may already be under siege from something far more subtle, far more dangerous, the unconscious of others quietly invading your own. Carl Jung spent his life studying these invisible dynamics. In his groundbreaking work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he revealed a shocking truth. Most of what truly governs human behavior is not under conscious control. Not yours, not mine, not theirs. And this is where the danger lies, because when someone has no awareness of their inner darkness, that darkness doesn't disappear. It looks for a host, and too often it finds one in you. Think back, how many times have you walked away from a conversation feeling inexplicably drained? How many times have you been blamed for something you didn't do, or cast as the rescuer in someone else's emotional chaos? You didn't sign up for the role, but suddenly you're living it. Jung had a name for this: projection. It's the unconscious act of placing one's disowned emotions, fears, and insecurities onto someone else. And once someone projects onto you, you're no longer a person to them. You become a symbol, villain, a hero, a failure, a fantasy. The problem? None of these roles are real, and none of them reflect who you actually are. Worse still, you might not even notice it's happening. You believe you're helping. You tell yourself you're just being compassionate, mature, understanding. But slowly, quietly, you're pulled into a psychological vortex that doesn't belong to you. You start solving problems that aren't yours. You take on pain that wasn't born in your own heart. You become emotionally entangled in patterns you never agreed to, and yet they begin to rule you. This isn't always a case of someone being manipulative on purpose. In fact, Jung warned us, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who act with malice. They are the ones who are completely unaware of themselves. These people are strangers to their own inner world. They've buried trauma, denied desires, rejected emotions, and wrapped it all in a mask of normalcy. They don't know they're projecting. They don't know they're causing harm. But they are. They're not evil. They're asleep. And that's what makes them dangerous. Because their darkness doesn't walk through the front door, it seeps in slowly. Through offhand comments. Through passive-aggressive suggestions. Through uncomfortable silences loaded with meaning. Over time, they pull you into their internal war. And you begin to question your reality. You wonder, what did I do wrong? You try harder to please, to fix, to heal what you didn't break. You become the vessel for their unresolved shadow, and the cost is your own clarity, your own stability, your own soul. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Maybe it's in your relationship, your friendship, your workplace, or even within your own family. And maybe, just maybe, you've been blaming yourself for the way things feel off, for the emotional exhaustion, for the confusion. But the truth is, there's nothing wrong with you. What's wrong is the way your energy, your empathy, and your presence are being hijacked by someone else's unconscious pain. Pain that you didn't cause. Pain that is not yours to carry. And it's time to put a stop to it. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the 6 types of emotionally dangerous people, those Carl Jung would urge you to watch out for. Not because they're inherently bad, but because they are deeply unaware. They don't know themselves, and that ignorance makes them unstable. These people will project onto you. They will pull you into narratives that distort who you are. And if you're not careful, you'll begin to live a life written by someone else's fear. So stay with me, because in the next part, we're going to expose each of these types one by one. You'll learn how to recognize them, how to protect yourself, and most importantly, how to take back control of your own inner world. The question is no longer, are they toxic? It's, are you being used as a mirror for their shadow? Let's find out. Do you really know the people around you? You might think you can spot toxic behavior, heavy energy, or a line being crossed. But what if the true danger isn't obvious at all? What if the most harmful people are often the kindest, the most familiar even your own family? While you stay alert to obvious threats, your mind could be slowly invaded by something far more subtle, the unconscious of others. Carl Jung devoted his life to studying these invisible forces. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he revealed a truth most of us ignore. The majority of what drives people lies outside of their awareness. That includes the people you trust. And that's what makes them dangerous. Because when someone is blind to their inner darkness, it seeks expression in the outside world. Often, it finds you. Think about it. How many times have you felt emotionally exhausted after a simple conversation? Or blamed for something you didn't do? That's projection, an unconscious defense mechanism where someone offloads what they can't face in themselves onto others. Suddenly, you're no longer seen clearly. You're turned into a villain, a hero, or a problem that exists only in their mind. And here's the scary part. You might not even notice. You think you're being kind, supportive, mature, but really, you're absorbing emotions and conflicts that were never yours. You're slowly sinking into someone else's psychological storm, mistaking it for empathy or love. Jung made it clear, the most dangerous people aren't the ones with bad intentions, but those who are completely unaware of their own psyche. These individuals live behind masks, trapped in trauma and repression. Their danger is quiet, subtle, and constant. It slips into your life through loaded silences, guilt-tripping comments, and emotional tension until you begin to doubt your own truth. Maybe you're experiencing this right now in a relationship, at work, or even with someone in your family. And maybe you're asking, what's wrong with me? The answer is nothing. But something is wrong with how you're being used as a vessel for someone else's unresolved shadow. In the next section, we'll reveal 6 types of people Jung would call emotionally dangerous and how to protect yourself from becoming their target. Stay with me. The deeper we go, the clearer things become. The last part showed how unconscious people can manipulate you without even realizing it. But things get even more dangerous when projection evolves into something deeper, something that looks perfect on the outside. When you sacrifice your mental clarity trying to help someone who refuses to explore their own inner world, you slowly begin to lose yourself. The more you invest in saving them, the more you get pulled under. Jung warned that projection traps you in symbolic roles you never asked for. You become the savior, the villain, the traitor, the parent. Everything except your true self. It's like acting in someone else's play, with no script of your own. Living in that kind of symbolic relationship means living inside a lie. You are no longer seen as a person with thoughts, needs, or emotions. Instead, you're treated as a projection screen for someone else's unresolved pain. And the scariest part, they're not even doing it on purpose. The unconscious manipulator slips into your life through your empathy, through your kindness, your care, your willingness to help. The only real defense is awareness. You must begin to spot the patterns, cut the invisible cords tying you to their emotional story. Ask yourself again and again, is what I'm feeling really mine? Or is it something I've absorbed from someone else? Because unless you stay conscious, you risk being rewritten by someone else's shadow. But there's another layer of danger, one that looks nothing like conflict or emotional chaos. It's the danger that wears a smile, the danger that performs, the one who doesn't just project, but becomes the mask they wear. In Jung's view, this is not only manipulation, it's self-erasure. This next type is known as the bearer of the persona. Unlike the unconscious manipulator, this person lives entirely for the image they've created. They speak, behave, and even think in ways meant to impress, not to express. And here's the problem. When someone identifies too closely with their social role or public image, they begin to disconnect from who they truly are. And worse, they pull others into their illusion. Jung explains in The Ego and the Unconscious that the persona isn't inherently bad. It's the social mask we all wear, or way of fitting into roles like teacher, friend, boss, or sibling. It helps us function in society. But when that mask fuses with your identity, when it's no longer just a role but your whole reality, that's when real psychological damage begins. The bearer of the persona becomes a master of controlled expression. They know exactly what to say, how to behave, when to smile. Everything feels polished, but nothing feels real. And if you're not careful, you might get drawn into that perfectly constructed world. You might even start believing it yourself until one day you don't remember who you are anymore. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at the persona itself, how it forms, why it's so seductive, and how to avoid losing your authentic self inside someone else's performance. Are you ready to face the truth behind the mask? Let's go deeper. When someone becomes trapped behind a perfect mask, something inside them begins to fracture. They may say all the right things, act politely, and avoid conflict at any cost. On the surface, everything seems calm, controlled, even admirable. But behind that calm exterior, there's often a soul quietly collapsing under the weight of self-denial. The more they cling to this image of perfection, the more they suffocate their true selves. And the cost of that repression doesn't just stay hidden, it always finds a way to surface. For those who live or work with this kind of person, the experience can feel deeply unsettling. You might not be able to explain it in words, but something feels off. Conversations lack authenticity. Emotions feel muted, rehearsed, even staged. There's a sense of distance, like everything is happening behind a layer of frosted glass. And it gets worse. The bearer of the persona, the person who lives through their mask, doesn't just repress their own truth. They expect others to do the same. Slowly, they project their own perfectionist standards onto you. You're expected to perform, to fit into their curated script, to never rock the boat. If you express an unexpected feeling, a raw truth, or a vulnerable thought, they recoil, they shut down, because your authenticity reminds them of the very parts of themselves they've buried deep. Carl Jung saw this as one of the greatest dangers to personal transformation. In his theory of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your true self, he warned that identifying too closely with the persona leads to spiritual paralysis. You become hypnotized by your role. You stop being a person and start being a performance. You become what others expect of you, and forget who you really are. And this doesn't just hurt the person behind the mask. It affects those around them. You begin to doubt your own instincts. You hold back what you want to say. You shrink parts of yourself to maintain the illusion of harmony. Slowly, without realizing it, you start wearing a mask, too. You adapt, edit, censor just to keep things smooth. Living with someone like this isn't just artificial. It's contagious. But there's something even more dangerous. Because emotions and desires don't disappear just because they're hidden. When someone spends years pretending, suppressing, polishing their image, all the messy, complex parts of the self don't vanish. They ferment in the dark corners of the unconscious. They gather weight and pressure like steam in a sealed chamber. And eventually, that pressure needs a release. That's when we cross into even more explosive territory. The repressed shadow. This is the person who lives carefully, walks with poise, speaks with restraint. They are always balanced, always composed, always appropriate. But behind that well-kept image lies something volatile. Every thought or feeling they be, deemed unacceptably, anger, envy, fear, desire, it doesn't go away. It goes underground. It becomes shadow in the next section. We'll confront the figure Jung called the owner of the repressed shadow. The person who believes they are all light, all goodness, all control until the darkness they've denied finally breaks loose. Because, as Jung once wrote in Ion, the shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in themselves, and yet insists on manifesting in some way. So, how do you protect yourself from someone whose darkness is waiting to erupt? And more importantly, how do you avoid becoming that person yourself? Let's go deeper. They repress emotions, label vulnerability as weakness, and live behind polished masks. But sooner or later, the shadow breaks through. Let's now look closer at the nature of this shadow. It's not some external force. It's not evil, lurking outside of us, or the wrongdoings of other people. The shadow is entirely internal. It is the anger you deny feeling, the envy you disguise with polite compliments, the sexuality you suppress, the ambition you hide behind false humility, all of the impulses, instincts, and truths that don't fit your self-image. These don't disappear. They go underground. They turn into shadow. And as Carl Jung famously said, what you do not make conscious directs your life, and you call it fate. In other words, the parts of yourself you refuse to face don't just vanish. They quietly take the wheel. The most dangerous part. The owner of a repressed shadow rarely looks dangerous on the surface. In fact, they often appear to be highly admirable, disciplined, responsible, even kind. But there's always something subtle that doesn't sit right. They can't tolerate weakness in others. They bristle when faced with raw emotion or spontaneity. They seem like they're always under tense, coiled, yet they never explode. Until they do. And when that moment comes, it's not a small outburst. It's catastrophic. It blindsides everyone around them. Their internal suppression becomes external. Destruction often aimed at those closest to them. People like this live in a state of emotional hypervigilance. They are constantly trying to keep their unconscious urges locked away. So they condemn those who express emotions freely. They judge those who fail. They try to control every detail, not because they're strong, but because they're terrified of losing control. As Jung observed, the stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow. And the more repressed the shadow, the more violent its return. You'll see this in people who react disproportionately to small issues, who carry decades-old grudges, who sabotage relationships with passive aggression. They're known as difficult or toxic by others. But what's actually happening is a psychological time bomb waiting to go off. And it doesn't stop there. The shadow isn't only made up of negative traits. Jung insisted that it also hides your best qualities, your creativity, your intuition, your spiritual insight, your hidden strengths. These two get locked away when we conform too tightly to what we think we should be. When we ignore this, all of that buried potential turns toxic. It festers and leaks out not as brilliance, but as bitterness. Living with someone like this is like walking through a minefield. You never know which step will set them off. You try to guess their moods, avoid their triggers, shrink yourself to stay safe. It's not just exhausting, it slowly reshapes you. But the roots of this repression don't come from nowhere. Often, it's driven by an illusion of moral superiority, a rigid belief in being good, in being right, in doing the correct thing at all times. Guilt becomes a weapon. Judgments become armor. And this is exactly what leads us to the next type Jung warned about, the moral controller. This is someone who doesn't just repress their own desires, they make you feel ashamed for having yours. They hide their shadow behind virtue, discipline, and ideals. But underneath, there's often an internal war they refuse to face. In the next part, we'll explore the moral controller, why their judgments are often projections, how they use guilt to manipulate, and why their deepest fear is not your failure, but your freedom. Are you ready to confront the shadows that wear halos? Let's move forward. They hide behind righteousness, but their weapon is control, and guilt is their favorite tool. As we saw in the last section, the repressed shadow, when masked by virtue, can become a dangerously manipulative force. And now, we arrive at one of its clearest expressions, the moral controller. This is not someone who quietly struggles with their inner darkness. No, this is the person who believes they've already conquered it. They speak of ethics, values, and higher principles. They invoke rules, spiritual teachings, or social ideals. But beneath that surface, they're driven not by compassion or insight, but by fear, repression, and the desperate need to feel superior. Carl Jung was deeply familiar with this archetype. He warned that when morality becomes a performance, it's no longer about the soul, it becomes a mask for unconscious domination. The moral controller doesn't see others as complex human beings. They see them as targets onto whom they can project the very traits they refuse to see in themselves. Have you ever met someone like this? They correct you constantly, not out of love, but out of a need to be right. They point out your flaws, your failures, your missteps, yet never question their own. Their advice often arrives coated in superiority. I'm only saying this for your own good. Or one day you'll understand I was right. These aren't expressions of care, they're signals of control. Jung understood that projection intensifies with repression. The more someone hides from their shadow, the more aggressively they try to purge it from others. And this is exactly what the moral controller does. They label others as sinners, deviants, or lost souls, not because they truly see danger in others, but because they can't tolerate their own unacknowledged desires. The real danger? Many moral controllers genuinely believe they're doing good. They think they're helping, guiding, even saving you. And that sincerity makes their influence more toxic. Because when someone manipulates from a place of truth and virtue, their power can feel absolute. They weaponize guilt, shame, and spiritual language in ways that are hard to challenge. In his book, Jung explores the archetypes of Christ and the Antichrist, not as literal figures, but as psychological realities. The Christ figure represents wholeness, light integrated with shadow. The Antichrist, however, is the illusion of purity disconnected from the darker sides of the self. The moral controller, Jung believed, embodies this illusion. They think they are the light, but by denying their own darkness, they actually perpetuate it. When you live under the influence of someone like this, you start to feel as if you're constantly failing. You feel guilty for being human. Your natural spontaneity, your joy, your mistakes, they all get filtered through their lens of judgment, and eventually you begin to self-censor. You cut off pieces of yourself. You conform not because you believe, but because you fear disapproval. Their morality becomes your mental prison. This pattern shows up everywhere in rigid families, controlling relationships, dogmatic religions, or even workplaces ruled by unwritten codes. In each case, the result is the same. Obedience is mistaken for virtue, and self-suppression is celebrated as discipline. Jung considered this deeply dangerous to individuation, the process of becoming your whole, authentic self. Because when you are constantly monitored by someone else's morality, you never discover your own. You don't grow. You perform. And here lies the bitter irony. The extreme moralist doesn't seek truth. They seek control when they can't control the external world. They focus on the internal world of those around them. They try to shape your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, not for your freedom, but for their comfort. So what can you do when someone uses goodness to manipulate? How do you reclaim your inner compass when it's been quietly taken from you? In the next section, we'll explore the tools Jung believed were essential to escape this dynamic. We'll learn how to spot projection, how to protect your inner life, and how to rebuild your identity outside the reach of moral controllers. Because freedom isn't just about walking away from control, it's about walking toward your own truth. Let's keep going. They may not wear a mask of morality, but what drives them is equally unconscious, perhaps even more dangerous. Unlike the moral controller who represses and projects, the next type of person Carl Jung warned us about is someone entirely consumed by what lies beneath the surface. The complected, these individuals don't just hide from their inner wounds, they are ruled by them. Their emotions erupt suddenly, often without logic or warning. One moment, you're embraced, the next, you're attacked. And the worst part, they often don't even realize what they've done. Jung described complexes as autonomous fragments of our clusters of unresolved emotions, memories, and traumas that developed from past experiences. These are not mild habits or quirks. They are living patterns inside the unconscious, with the power to hijack behavior in an instant. A complex might be born from childhood abandonment, betrayal, humiliation, or emotional neglect. But once it's buried deep, it operates like a hidden program, one that triggers without asking permission. Picture living with someone who seems loving, affectionate, and kind in one moment, but turns cold, furious, or distant in the next without explanation. A kind word might be misinterpreted as condescension. A casual joke becomes an offense. A compliment is twisted into an accusation. You try to reassure them, but your words don't land. Instead, they spiral into emotional chaos, dragging you down with them. The tragedy is that these individuals often don't know they're doing it. When they explode in anger, shut down into silence, or cry uncontrollably, they may believe they are responding to you, but what's actually happening is much deeper. They're reliving an old wound. You're not the enemy, but you've unknowingly stepped on a psychological landmine laid decades ago. And yet, it's not always like this. That's what makes these relationships so hard to escape. After the storm passes, the person might return to being warm, apologetic, even loving. These moments of calm feel real because they often are, but they're temporary. They lull you into thinking the worst is over, that maybe this time it will last. This emotional whiplash creates an addictive cycle. You start to hope, to excuse, to adapt. You walk on eggshells, shrinking yourself to avoid triggering the next outburst. Jung explained this dynamic with chilling clarity. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he writes that complexes are like splinter personalities, fragments of ourselves that take over, interrupting the conscious ego. And in Psychological Types, he warned that unless these complexes are brought into awareness and processed, they will continue to erupt in unpredictable and damaging ways. For those who live with or love someone dominated by these forces, the relationship becomes a labyrinth. You're constantly trying to decode their mood, fix the emotional imbalance, or prove your innocence. But it's never enough, because the root of the reaction was never about you in the first place. The question is, how long can you mold yourself before you lose sight of who you are? In the next part, we'll explore the emotional toll of being trapped in someone else's complex psychological erosion that happens slowly but surely. We'll talk about how to recognize when you're being used as an emotional scapegoat, and how to begin reclaiming your own center, because understanding the complex is only the first step. The next is learning how to break free from its grip before it becomes your own. Let's keep going. You've tried to tiptoe around their moods, adjust your tone, and censor your thoughts just to keep the peace. But here's the harsh reality: that peace is an illusion, because the storm you're trying to avoid isn't caused by you. It's already inside them, always simmering, always waiting. And no matter how carefully you step, it will eventually erupt. Carl Jung taught us that when complexes go unacknowledged, they don't just stay hidden, they take over. They start speaking for the person, acting through them, feeling through them. These aren't minor quirks. These are deep psychological programs built from trauma, pain, and unresolved emotion. A person may be dominated by an inferiority complex, a martyr complex, abandonment issues, or even persecution fantasies. And each of these has its own logic, its own set of demands, its own emotional climate. And the more you try to manage these outbursts or emotional spirals, the more you deceive yourself into thinking control is possible. But you can't control what isn't yours. Being close to someone who is ruled by such inner chaos means constantly living in a state of alertness. The present moment is never just the present. It's always haunted by the past, contaminated by ghosts that were never yours to carry. Over time, those ghosts start to seep into you. You begin second-guessing your own perceptions. Was it really your fault? Did you say the wrong thing? Are you being too sensitive or too cold? You don't notice it right away, but bit by bit, you are being emotionally colonized by someone else's unconscious mind. But this isn't even the most dangerous form of psychic invasion, because while the complexed person lashes out in waves exploding, then apologizing, there is another kind of person whose damage is slower, subtler, and more insidious. They won't scream, accuse, or belittle. Instead, they consume your energy quietly, relentlessly, until you are left drained and hollow. In the final part of this cycle, we meet one of the most dangerous profiles Jung indirectly warned us about: the psychic vampire. These individuals don't take with force, they take with need. They feed not on your presence, but on your energy. They need your attention, your reassurance, your time, your empathy. They don't demand directly. Instead, they manipulate through subtle guilt, chronic victimhood, emotional dependency disguised as love. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've already given too much. In Jungian language, this dynamic reflects a symbiotic bondan, unhealthy attachment, where boundaries dissolve and individuation, the process of becoming a whole person, is blocked. The psychic vampire thrives in this blurry space where two people are no longer seen as separate beings, but as emotional extensions of one another. At first, it feels like support. You give your time, you offer a listening ear, you comfort them. But slowly, your soul starts to shrink. You stop having space for yourself. You no longer know where their needs end and yours begin. And yet, when you try to pull back, you feel guilty, selfish, even for needing silence, space, or solitude. Why does that happen? Because the psychic vampire is a master at flipping roles. One moment, they are the helpless victim, and the next, they are accusing you of abandonment, of cruelty, of not caring enough. They use your empathy against you. And before long, you are no longer living from your truth. You are simply trying to prevent another emotional collapse. You become the caretaker of a bond that is slowly killing your spirit. Jung reminded us that one of the keys to freedom is to make the unconscious conscious, not just in others, but in ourselves. And here lies the most powerful realization of all. Maybe, at some point in your life, you've played one of these roles too. Maybe you've projected. Maybe you've been complexed. Maybe you've drained someone else while drowning in your own pain. None of us are exempt. We all have a shadow. We all carry wounds. But the difference lies in whether we have the courage to face them more, whether we choose to let others pay the price. This video was never just about others. It was about you. It was a mirror, a map, a warning, but also an invitation. If you've made it this far, it's because you're ready to see, to name, to let go, and to reclaim what's always been yours, your inner sovereignty. So, I invite you to take the next step. Leave a comment honestly. Which of these profiles have you encountered, and which do you see within yourself? Your words may be the start of your own transformation, or the light someone else needs to begin theirs. And before you go, don't miss what's next. The upcoming video will take you even deeper into the unconscious patterns that shape your life. Because the more light we bring to what's hidden, the less power it has over us.